All right, ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to introduce our next guest, a man who has taught at Harvard, Stanford, held academic chairs at Syracuse, Notre Dame, now holds the Jewett Chair in Religion, Philosophy, Public Policy at the American Enterprise Institute. He has written over 100 books, and this is really his first memoir, a man who has seen it all, done it all, and the book, Writing from Left to Right, My Journey from Liberal to Conservative. We welcome in Michael Novak. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Well, it's great to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time.
Great to talk to you.
I have so much I want to ask you in such a relatively short amount of time to do it. Your life has been, you've been so blessed, and to know and have relationships and be a part of history with people like Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II and Prime Minister Thatcher and others. Yet you also spent your early days campaigning for and working with George McGovern, Bobby Kennedy. So you've been on both sides of the spectrum, and as your title of your book indicates, your journey from a liberal to conservative. Talk about how that happened.
Gradually, but I can mention a few highlights.
Sure.
For one thing, I tried hard to work with the radical left at Stanford, but I couldn't stand it when people started spelling America with a K. My family were immigrants, and we were very poor. And the country, America, has been so good to us compared to anywhere else on earth we could have gone, as other Slovaks at the time did, Argentina, some to Europe and Canada and so forth. We did by far the best. And that's due to the country, so I couldn't stand that. Then I started, I supported the war on poverty, and then it ended so badly that as crime jumped 600% in just a few years, families started forming. We had enormous proportions of young people born out of wedlock. And whatever you think about that morally, its social costs are enormous, as I learned when I studied it with a seminar of people on the left and on the right. We wrote a report called The New Consensus on Family and Welfare. Evenly numbered committee of 22 with 11 on the left and 11 on the right, and first-class people. And by the way, that book had a good fruit because the Reagan administration got on board it, and in due time, the Clinton administration came from the other side, and then we had a consensus, indeed. And many of the suggestions came from our report. But those things moved me from the left. And then last, I guess, in a row was as I studied economics more and more, my education was in philosophy and theology and a lot in literature, but I hadn't really done much in economics. I had, fairly primitive ideas about the market, and I didn't appreciate the role of incentives in putting action into the system. And most of all, I didn't appreciate the central role of invention and discovery in economic progress. That's something I learned partly from Abraham Lincoln, who started the land-grant colleges in every new territory on the grounds that that's what wealth comes from.
Right, right. We should point out that Abraham Lincoln is not one of the aforementioned that you had personal relationships with.
No, just deep love for and learning from.
Let me ask you this. So is it your view that the left, for instance, the party of JFK, that JFK, so many people love to say on the left that Ronald Reagan couldn't be or wouldn't recognize today's Republican Party. I contend that JFK could never claim to be a Democrat in today's Democratic Party because, he was for a strong defense. He was for low taxes. He was on so many issues. I don't think he would recognize this party.
Yeah, well, I'm still with JFK, and not in every detail, but roughly, he was my hero, and I still, reverberate to the themes you mentioned in him.
And do you agree that he would not recognize today's Democratic Party?
Well, I think not. I know I had to break from it as it became more and more imitative of European social democracy. It's the first generation in American history when some of our leaders said we had to live up to Europe. Where the heck was the New World? Where was the Old World?
Yeah.
And I think they just made a bad mistake. as we're paying the price of it.
Well, if you will, sir, before I ask you to talk about your relationship, a very special one with Pope John Paul II, where we are today with, for instance, news made today, Barack Obama made a phone call to the president of Iran, says now he believes that they could reach a comprehensive deal. I had one guest, former Undersecretary of the Navy, who said the first words that came to mind were Neville Chamberlain. But economically, which I know is very important to you and was important to you in switching over to the right, economically and politically, would you weigh in on the performance of Barack Obama, sir?
Oh, it's not just him alone, but he's just such a novice in economics. He's a novice in foreign affairs. It's just tragic. But look, what I hate most of all about our present economic situation, a lot of people want to spend more money on the poor out of compassion, but where are they going to get it from? They're going to borrow, and our children are going to have to pay it. They praise themselves for their compassion, but they're paying for it out of our children's and grandchildren's expense. That's not much generosity of spirit, I think.
We're talking to Michael Novak, author of a great new book, Writing from Left to Right, My Journey from Liberal to Conservative. Talk about, again, I pick the Pope because I think he has the most gravitas here because of who he was and the position he held. But you, as I mentioned before, so many people that you have been blessed to deal with over your lifetime. But talk about your relationship with Pope John Paul II.
Well, naturally, I was excited because his family comes from the same part of the world my family comes from, northern Slovakia, which for part of its history was part of Poland. And the Pope always said, Michael says he's Slovak, but he's actually Polish, which I thought was a great compliment coming from him, even though I wrote to him and I said it's not genetically true and it's not geographically true. But then I found out, in fact, the counties my grandparents came from did belong to Poland for almost 400 years. So darn it, he turned out to be right again. But he invited me to dinner one night in 1991, the year Centesimus Annus came out, and we hit it off, and his secretary told me anytime I come to Rome, write in advance or even telephone when I'm there. And if the Pope has any free time, a lunch or a dinner, they'd like to have me come over. And they treated me like a friend, and I always brought a joke or two. And, my job was to help him relax. But he always had a few questions for me on economics or something else, probing this or probing that. And it was just great. He publicly called me one of his 3 or 4 friends several times. And that's the thing that's made me happiest in my whole life.
Well,
the woman I married, whom I love so much.
And by the way, happy birthday. You turned 80 on September 9th, and God bless you for that. And, I'm reading here a quote. You talk about, my dream was to write about the philosophy, the theology of American culture, not because it was American, but because there was something different here and unique. It belonged to the whole human race, but we were pioneering it. And I think that, that speaks to American exceptionalism, does it not?
Oh, yes. And I think exceptionalism means, in this case, original. We're the first. This is the place where a lot of new ideas were born. We're the first developed nation. We're the first democratic republic, not purely democratic, not purely republic, and first to establish bills of rights. And the first in so many ways, and that's a terrific heritage to be part of, and not everybody in the world's caught up to these things.
And you're also a sports person. You wrote a book, The Joy of Sports, which is considered one of the great sports books of all times. And I'd love to have you back and get some of your thoughts on the sports world. But really, just a treasure. This book is your memoir, which encompasses so much. And I think everybody should have a copy of it and read it. Writing from Left to Right, My Journey from Liberal to Conservative. By a man who has seen much, much more than most do in a lifetime. Michael Novak. Sir, thank you.
Thanks a million. You've really been very kind.
Thank you. Okay. I appreciate that. Michael Novak, folks. And when we come back, the UN report on climate change is out. And guess what? They decided that 95%, they're sure that we are responsible for global warming. Only one problem. Where's the global warming? They left that out of their report. Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com will join me when we come back right here. Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax TV and Radio.
The Steve Malzberg